Thanks very much for staying with us. Time now for Eye on Africa with me, Georgia Calvin-Smith. First up, state spending is in for slashing in South Africa as the country's finance minister announces the latest budget. He warns that there is no doubt that a crisis is on the horizon. Also, Ban Ki-moon makes a guest appearance at an investment on a tour of Africa conference in Democratic Republic of Congo, as well as supporting the country's economic ambitions. He also urges attention to be paid to the importance of good governance. And Kung Fu is kicking off in Mali. In another sign of the close ties China is forging with some African nations, the ancient Eastern martial art is attracting more and more Malians from all walks of life. Well, South Africa's finance minister has announced a crisis budget that includes tax hikes, a rollback on spending on government perks, and a crackdown on corruption. Now, Pravin Gordhan warned Parliament on Wednesday that some serious belt tightening was in order until the continent's most developed economy manages to boost growth.
There's no doubt about the fact that we're in crisis, and that helps. It helps to understand that we have a serious challenge in South Africa and that we have to do extraordinary things to get us out of that crisis or a set of challenges and meet them in a creative and constructive and firm way. The one area that government is absolutely clear on is that we are not imposing austerity on our people.
Rand fell by over 2% against the dollar after Gordhan spoke. Cutbacks will mainly come from ditching public service jobs and increased taxes on fuel, alcohol and tobacco. The government faces a tough balancing act between winning back the confidence of ratings agencies and keeping voters on side in a municipal election year. Well, South African political analyst Daniel Silk tells us more about the factors that have caused his country's economic troubles.
As usual, it's a combination of factors. There are some very big headwinds, global headwinds that many emerging market countries face, notably in our case, the end of the commodity super cycle, lower extractive prices of metals and minerals. That's an external factor, but clearly also from a domestic point of view, poor application of policy over many years in South Africa, wasteful expenditure and increased corruption haven't helped the position at all. And our domestic low growth, therefore, is very much a combination of both external and domestic.
Daniel, state-held enterprises have weighed heavily on the economy. Has anything been put in place to turn this particular issue around?
Well, ideologically, our government does want to have a fairly heavy hand for the state, and the ongoing issues relating to governance within our state-owned enterprise sector are cause for concern. I mean, we bleed billions of rands as a result of mismanagement, corruption, inefficiencies, and poor planning. And at least we saw, I think, indication from the minister today and over the last few weeks that something needs to be done. In other words, the governance aspect, the boards, those in charge of the state-owned enterprises may well be reviewed. We've already seen that take place with our post office, who has a new CEO to try and rectify that situation. But ultimately, of course, government will have to accept that it cannot continue to place its own political cronies in positions of power and will need to take some very drastic action, which might be politically unpopular, in order to bring them around.
Daniel Silk there speaking to me a little earlier on. Well, after meeting with President Joseph Kabila, the UN's chief expressed concern about the targeting of opposition and civil society members in DR Congo. Ban Ki-moon's words came on Wednesday as 6 activists were sentenced to 2 years in prison over their preparations for last week's anti-Kabila strike. Ki-moon is on a tour of Africa and, whilst opening an investment conference in DR Congo, encouraged leaders to run their countries in good faith.
It's necessary to base economic and social development on a stable foundation. We need good governance and a constitutional state.
Well, Thomas Nicolas has been following Ban Ki-moon's trip for us. He brings us the latest.
It was a very busy day for Ban Ki-moon in Kinshasa. The Secretary General of the UN started with a speech at a conference about investing and promoting peace in the Great Lakes region. He then met with the majority, then the political opposition, the civil society, and to conclude with Joseph Kabila. He repeated to all of them that, according to him, the national dialogue that Joseph Kabila wants is the best solution for DR Congo, simply because it is the best way to avoid violence in the country and in the region. But he then said that he was worried about human rights violation in DR Congo. And just as he was meeting with Joseph Kabila, we learned that 6 activists from human rights group Lucha in Goma in eastern Congo had been sentenced to 2 years in prison.
Voters in Niger still face a wait for provisional results from the weekend's legislative and presidential polls. With only partial results from a few towns out, some waiting to see if President Mahamadou Issoufou, who's won another term, are frustrated and even suspicious of the delay.
In Niamey, everyone has started working again, but residents here all have Sunday's election in mind. The results are still not known. Some find this long wait suspicious.
They must give the results quickly, because the situation is too tense right now. People are nervous.
We want the results quickly. Everyone is waiting.
Others feel there is nothing to worry about.
It's completely normal that they should take 72 hours. That's a minimum. In some countries, it takes a week or even 1 month. Why should we in Niger be impatient?
This is Niger. We'll wait.
The head of the Electoral Commission says there are logistical reasons and regulations that explain why the process is taking time.
At every level, the representatives of all the parties and the candidates need to validate the results, and that can explain why the transmission of results is taking time.
It's here at the headquarters of the Electoral Commission in the capital Niamey that the first partial results have been published and announced, and it's these first partial results that have already been criticized by the opposition as fabricated. This Wednesday, the ruling party responded to this claim. It said that the opposition's claim was absolutely ridiculous. Here in Niger, clearly the tensions are still running high, a few hours ahead of the announcement of the final result.
Well, Burkina Faso's ousted leader has sidestepped any prospect of extradition to face murder charges back home by taking Ivorian citizenship. Blaise Compaoré is wanted in connection to the killing of iconic ex-leader Thomas Sankara back in 1987. Compaoré apparently took Ivorian nationality over a year ago, but the move has only just now come to light. His 27-year rule ended in 2014 after a wave of popular protests against the prospect of him running for another term. The Chadian opposition movement called That's Enough organised a nationwide shutdown on Wednesday in protest against President Idriss Déby's bid for a 5th term in office. Schools and shops were closed and the streets of N'Djamena and other cities were empty as civil society groups, the Chadian Human Rights League and trade unions wielded their clout. Déby's been in office for 2.5 decades and will run for re-election in April. Finally, Kung Fu is kicking off in Mali. Another sign of the close ties China has forged with some countries in Africa. The ancient Eastern martial art is attracting more and more Malians from all walks of life. Laurent Berstecker has the story.
This isn't a scene from an action movie, but a very real example of Mali's growing martial arts craze. Here, Chinese Kung Fu has become increasingly popular and several schools have recently opened in Bamako. Every day, dozens of Malians come to rehearse their deadly choreography under the watchful eye of Master Sanogo.
I started with a Chinese master who came here to Mali. He started teaching me in 1990. He said, Mr. Sanogo, one day you'll be competing on the international stage. That's what gave me the courage to start teaching.
Pupils start to train barehanded and can eventually learn to wield sticks, swords, and even fans. But for Master Sanogo, Kung Fu isn't only about self-defense, By strengthening the body and the mind, he believes martial arts can also teach balance and discipline in everyday life. The sport's widening appeal in Mali is but one sign of the intensified cultural exchanges between China and Africa. A growing number of Malians have also been traveling to Asia to study martial arts.
Well, that wraps up Eye on Africa for now. Thanks very much for joining us, and please do so again if you can. Take care.